questions. Questions orales. The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
This Liberal government constantly votes to increase taxes on Canadians. They voted to increase taxes on fuel. They voted to increase taxes on home heating. And at a time when Canadians are struggling to put food on the table for their families, 1.5 million Canadians visiting food banks in a single month, these Liberals voted to increase their carbon tax on food production. So when will they finally quit forcing their failed carbon tax on struggling Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I understand that the Conservatives are still debating whether or not the climate crisis is real, and I understand that their economic policy can be summed up by cancelling the price on pollution. What I don't understand is that yesterday the Conservatives voted against a tax cut for small businesses, Madam Speaker. They voted against eliminating interest on student loans. Madam Speaker, we have been there for Canadians. We have a strong and prudent fiscal policy in this country. I just don't understand why the Conservatives consistently oppose it.
Honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Madam Speaker, what we oppose is their failed carbon tax plan. It's not an environmental plan, and what we're voting against is, like the Auditor General saw, $27 billion in misappropriated COVID funds. What we're going to continue to vote against is the wasteful spending of these inflationary arsonists. Madam Speaker, these Liberals haven't found a tax that they don't love. When will they finally get rid of their tax and spend ways and give Canadians a well-deserved break?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I'm not sure who the Conservative member is referring to when he calls people arsonists, but clearly the facts and the numbers don't seem to matter to the Conservatives. If they bothered to look at the facts, they would see that we have the lowest deficit and the lowest debt of all G7 countries. They would also see that we continue to have a AAA credit rating, which means, Madam Speaker, and the numbers bear this out, business investors are finding Canada to be the most prudent and responsible investment, Madam Speaker. Business investment is up in this country. I just wish that the Conservatives would stop denigrating our economy.
The Honourable member for Calgary, Midnapore.
Madam Speaker, because of this Liberal government, Christmas will be more expensive for Canadians than ever before. 52% of Canadians are worried about buying gifts this Christmas. 61% of Canadians are worried about putting gas in their car to go and visit loved ones over the holidays. And 53% of Canadians are worried about buying groceries for Christmas dinner. Madam Speaker, this is supposed to be the most wonderful time of the year. So when will this Liberal government give Canadians a break and axe the carbon tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, nobody is believing this feigned compassion on behalf of the Conservatives. It is the government's policies that ensured that 2 million fewer Canadians are suffering from poverty in this country. It is the policies that we have put in place that are helping Canadians make ends meet, whether it's the rental benefit that will become available in a few days' time, whether it is the dental subsidy that is already available to Canadian families, whether it is the supports for childcare, whether it is doubling the GST tax credit, Madam Speaker. We have been there for Canadians and will continue to be there.
L'honorable député de Louis.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Madam Speaker, we're a few days or a couple of weeks from Christmas. Millions of families will be sitting down to dinner, and one of the things that will be on their mind is inflation. And inflation is hitting hardest where it hurts most on an essential good, which is food. So the government has to do something, and what they can do is not increase taxes. Will the government promise not to raise taxes in 2023, yes or no? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, the tax my colleague refers to is the carbon tax, or a price on pollution, and Quebecers fully agree that polluters should have to pay. The price on pollution doesn't even apply in Quebec, though. So I'd just like to remind my colleague that you have to be consistent with the facts, and you have to be able to make sure that that the votes reflect the Conservatives' position. Yesterday, they opposed measures that would help Canadians. The honourable member, well, that's why I didn't talk about the carbon tax. The member raised it. And why? Because she knows full well that they are going to increase the carbon tax in 2023, and that will help nobody. And while we're at it, teaching lessons and so on, I'd like to remind this government that they're the 58th out of 63 when it comes to their performance on combating climate change. So I will repeat my question. Will the government increase taxes in 2023? Yes or no? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madame la Présidente, là, je me...
Madam Speaker, now I'm getting mad because, yes, I referred to the carbon tax because that's the only possible tax the Conservatives could be referring to. There is no federal tax on foodstuffs, Madam Speaker, and the member opposite knows that full well. Their feigned compassion here in the House today, Madam Speaker, isn't true because yesterday they voted against things that would help Canadians. The honourable member for Saint-Jean. Madam Speaker, according to Superior Court Chief Justice Marianne Paquette, many trials have had to be postponed in recent months because the Minister of Justice has been so slow in appointing judges. In one judicial district in the Montreal area, hearings couldn't be held for a full month because of a lack of judges. And when the minister's office is asked, they say the appointments will be made in due course. Will the minister not admit that due course is long overdue? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her question. I was present when Chief Justice Paquette was sworn in a week and a half ago in Montreal. I was there, and the bar and the Chief Justices are very pleased with the quality and the diversity of the people we've appointed to the Superior Court. We appointed 10 people this year. There are 9 vacancies yet to be filled, and we are working on that. I hope to have good news in the near future. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Madam Speaker, when the Chief Justice says we're missing 12 judges, they say, no, it's just 9 judges that are lacking. Maybe there's a shortage of names on Liberal lists, but public confidence in the justice system is what's at stake, and this system no longer has the capacity to respond. When are they going to take appointments to the bench seriously and fill those vacancies? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, that's precisely what we're doing all across Canada. We're filling vacancies. We set up a process that's transparent, that's effective, and we are going about filling those vacancies. We're doing it diligently, and as I said, the results are excellent. We have high quality and very diverse appointments being made.
Mr. Burnaby.
Average wait times in Ontario ERs have hit a record high of over 20 hours. All the premiers are meeting today about the crisis in children's hospitals and ERs across the country. But guess who decided this wasn't important enough to show up for? The Prime Minister. Our healthcare system is in crisis, and Conservative premiers are openly saying their plan is to gut and privatize the public healthcare that Canadians rely on. Why doesn't the Prime Minister think this problem important enough to warrant his attention? And why won't he even bother to show up to fix this crisis?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our system is indeed in a crisis. Our health workers are very tired. Backlogs due to COVID-19 are impacting not only COVID-19 patients, there are quite many of them in our hospitals, but many other patients who have been suffering from backlogs in surgeries and diagnostics. Madam Speaker, that's why we've been there for provinces and territories, sending tens of billions of dollars in addition to the Canada Health Transfer over the last few months and years.
Honourable Member for Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke.
Madam Speaker, every single month we lose a member of the Canadian Forces to death by suicide. Clearly, more needs to be done to prevent these tragic losses for the forces and for the families. One of the barriers to serving members getting the mental health supports they need is the fact that self-harm remains a disciplinary offense under the Military Code of Conduct. For more than 6 years, the families have been asking this government to act. Will the Minister of Defence support my proposal to remove self-harm as a disciplinary offence so that serving members can get the mental health supports they need and deserve?
Hear, hear.
Honourable Minister of Defence.
Madam Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his very timely question. In fact, we've been working very hard on responding to the recommendations in the Arbour report, which do involve examining our current law as well as law under the National Defence Act. I take the member opposite's question with great earnest and interest, and I look forward to responding to it as we examine the path forward for our armed forces, as we seek to build a military that is inclusive and that responds to the needs of the Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you.
Honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Madam Speaker, the Liberals' wasteful spending continues. The $4 billion Canada Digital Adoption Program has a stream called Boost Your Business. And the government has given a contract to an organization, Magnet, in order to oversee placing more than 16,000 students in jobs. As of October 3rd, that organization has been paid $1.2 million, and yet there has been 0 job placements. So will this Liberal government end their wasteful inflationary spending so people can put food on their table and heat their homes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I thank the member opposite for the question, for her advocacy, her genuine advocacy on behalf of small businesses. One thing that people learned in her part of the country and right around the country is that ensuring businesses adopt to online commerce is critical to not just their survival, but their success going forward. That's why we launched a $4 billion Canada Digital Adoption Program. That's why we are investing in ensuring that small and medium-sized businesses can ensure to do commerce online. That is the way of securing their future. That is what we'll continue to invest in on this side of the House, in ensuring those monies reach those businesses.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Madam Speaker, this government continues to roll out programs with lack of controls. And we saw this recently from the Auditor General's report, where more than $32 billion went to people that weren't applicable for programs or need to be investigated. And this was due to lack of controls on pandemic programs. We know that the Governor of the Bank of Canada said that inflation is homegrown. We know that the Parliamentary Budget Officer said that hundreds of billions of dollars went out the door during the pandemic, not for pandemic programs. So again, will this government stop their inflationary, wasteful spending so people can put food on their table and heat their homes?
Parliamentary Secretary.
When the pandemic hit, we acted quickly to get recovery benefits into people's bank accounts without delay. To achieve that goal, we planned to verify eligibility in the back end after the fact. This approach kept workers attached to their jobs and positioned our economy to come roaring back, which it did. The Auditor General's report found that our individual support programs achieved their intended goals of getting money to Canadians quickly, allowing Canadians to stay home safely and avoid severe social and economic consequences. Madam Speaker, the Auditor General also noted that lower-income workers and groups most impacted by the pandemic were able to benefit from these programs. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Lethbridge.
Canadians were advised by the Deputy Prime Minister that they should cut their Disney Plus accounts in order to help them make ends meet. Meanwhile, this government has no problem spending $6,000 on a single hotel night, or $54 million on a failed Arrive scam app, or more recently, $32 billion with a B, billion dollars on altogether illegitimate or suspicious funding with regards to COVID. And the worst part is that Canadians are actually on the hook for all this spending. Wow. Canadians, the Canadian people who work incredibly hard. So when will the Liberals show them some respect and stop their wasteful spending?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, when the pandemic hit, our government acted quickly to ensure that Canadians had the support they needed to get by. We were clear from the outset that we would do post-payment verifications in order to get money out the door quickly when it was needed, while also ensuring support went to eligible individuals. This work is ongoing in a responsible and compassionate manner, and we were also clear that fraud would not be tolerated and that individuals who made good faith mistakes would not face penalties. Madam Speaker, we are taking a responsible approach to ensure a fair process. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
This is the problem with these Liberals. They make excuse after excuse after excuse for spending a whole lot of money to accomplish a whole lot of nothing. And at the end of the day, it's Canadians who pay the bill. The cost of living is going up. Meanwhile, this government has no problem spending. Canadians are facing a 40-year record high with regard to inflation. Grocery prices have skyrocketed. 20% of Canadians are forced to skip meals. Meanwhile, those across the way continue to chat with one another and maybe even laugh in mockery. 20% of Canadians are forced to skip meals. 1.5 million Canadians are going to a food bank.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, the policies and programs that we put in place helped Canadians weather the storm of the pandemic, and that was incredibly important. And we would do it again if we had to, Madam Speaker. But I would also like to point out that the investments that we made in Canadians during the pandemic also resulted in our economy rebounding much more quickly and much more strongly than other countries around the world. Madam Speaker, we made responsible choices at a time of emergency in this country, and the result is that the Canadian economy is doing better for it.
The Honourable Member from Flamborough-Glenbrook.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Wasteful Liberal spending is up again, as we heard from the Auditor General, including sending checks to prisoners and dead people. This only adds more fuel to the raging inflationary fire. So as a result, here's what's also up. Grocery prices, interest and mortgage rates, and sadly, food bank use in the GTA. So Madam Speaker, when will this Liberal government end their wasteful inflationary spending so Canadians can afford to put food on the table and heat their homes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, on this side of the House, we know that the programs that we put in place during the COVID-19 pandemic helped 9 million Canadians weather the storm, to stay safe, to keep a roof over their head, food on the table. Madam Speaker, since that time, we continue to invest in Canadians. Over 2 million Canadians have been lifted out of poverty in this country since this government has come into power. May I remind them that 450,000 children are now living better than they could have before. We've put in dental care for children under 12. We're putting in rental supports for low-income families. The opposition...
The Honourable Member for Huron-Bruce.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Gradually, then suddenly, 2015 to now, the Liberals have added $800 billion in debt, nearly doubled the debt. What was the inflation rate in October of 2015? 1%. What was it earlier this year? Over 8%. Now, they've tripled the carbon tax on every single thing you need to live your life. If the Liberals wanted to help Canadians, what could they do? How about cut the carbon tax? When will the Liberals get rid of this wasteful carbon tax? Thank you.
Well, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And yesterday, the Conservatives had the opportunity to vote for affordability, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, and they failed. The other thing they failed on, Madam Speaker, is fighting climate change. But there's good news coming to Ontario, Madam Speaker. The price on pollution is increasing, yes, but the climate action rebate is also increasing, and our citizens from Ontario, the average family of four, will get $244 a quarter. That's $1,000 in people's bank accounts, Madam Speaker. We can fight climate change. We can help affordability. They don't have a plan for...
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Madam Speaker, Ottawa imposed a moratorium on the herring and mackerel fisheries 2 days before the season started. Do you know what the solution for the Minister of Fisheries was in committee for fishermen with no income? Change jobs. With 2 days' notice, the minister bans people from working, and when they ask for support, she tells them to change jobs. When you prevent people from earning a living, you have a responsibility to them. When will the minister drop the condescension and announce compensation for pelagic fishers? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
And I said on committee, and let me correct the record, that's not what the minister said. But our goal is to grow Canada's fish and seafood sector, and the science has been clear that mackerel stocks are in a critical zone and have been for more than a decade. And without this forage fish, other fish do not survive. So that also goes with lobster, and it also goes with crab. We're taking action. We want on this side not just the mackerel to survive, but we want it to thrive for fishers and coastal communities. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Madam Speaker, it's important to protect the resource. Fishers are the first to say so, but the minister is not thinking about them. She has no compensation plan, no plan to redirect them to other types of fisheries. Her only plan until this week was to tell them to go on EI, but they don't qualify. The minister has banned their work. Madam Chair, you can't play around with people's jobs like that. Will the minister get her act together and announce compensation to fishers before the holidays? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And saying it twice doesn't make it any more true. The fact of the matter is that we're focused on the stock. We're focused on creating a healthier stock. As I mentioned, the stock has been in the critical zone for the past 10 years. Our focus is on fishers, and it's also on fishers' communities. That's what we're about on this side. So we'll continue. We'll continue to work with fishing communities. We'll continue to work with fishing associations because that's the right thing to do for the stock, and it's the right thing to do for fishers.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, the Liberals awarded a contract to protect sensitive RCMP communications systems from espionage to the subsidiary of a company charged with espionage. No security review was undertaken. No consideration was given to Beijing's ownership of the company. The Liberals claim that vigorous security processes are in place. Where were those security processes when this contract was approved?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I thank the member opposite for this important question, and I want to make it very clear to all members of the House that our government takes foreign interference very seriously. Speaker, we are aware about the concerns around RCMP's contract with Sinclair Technologies, and it is our understanding that RCMP has suspended that contract. We are also undertaking a review to ensure that never at any point Canadian national security is ever jeopardized. Thank you very much.
Honourable Member for St. Albert Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, the only reason this contract was approved is because we have an incompetent Liberal government that has repeatedly failed to protect our sovereignty and security from Beijing, from illegal police stations, to interference in our elections, to now this. The contract has been suspended, but it should never have been approved in the first place. Why do the Liberals only do the right thing after they get caught failing Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, let's be very clear, and I'm sure all members of this House agree on this part, that safeguarding our democracy and our national security is of paramount importance. This is not a partisan issue. I think this is an issue that we all agree on, and we need to make sure that we remain vigilant when it comes to protecting our national security, and that is why the contract with Sinclair Technologies has been suspended by the RCMP. That is why we are reviewing all mechanisms to ensure that such contracts are never awarded, because, Speaker, once again, safeguarding a democracy and national security is of paramount importance. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Madam Speaker, despite what the Prime Minister claims, his admiration for the Chinese dictatorship speaks louder than his words. Canadians have every reason to be concerned because the Liberals only take action when they get caught. The CSIS revealed this week that China is the greatest threat to Canadian national security. The U.S. and CSIS have been warning the Prime Minister since 2015. Will this government be influenced by that or by the Chinese? The Honourable Minister. That is an important question because it is worrisome. That contract that should never have been signed. And national security should be at the heart of all our decision-making. And that's why in our new Pacific strategy, we have put a heightened focus on national security issues. The Honourable Member. A lens, Madam Speaker. They're talking about a security lens being brought to these decisions. But CSIS and the U.S. have been warning the Prime Minister for years about Chinese influence. Officials and this government, who are accountable for those officials, awarded contracts to companies closely related to the Chinese dictatorship. And all their solution today is a lens, a new lens. Why do the Liberals only do something when it hits the headlines? The Honourable Minister. I hope my colleague will read the Indo-Pacific strategy, because clearly he hasn't yet. Our foreign policy has always been concerned with national security issues, but what we're saying is that it is going to be a part of all decisions made by our independent public service, and that contract never should have been signed.
Speaker, veterans, Indigenous people, and hunters are contacting my office with serious concerns about the last-minute amendment to Bill C-21. And yesterday, the AFN voted unanimously against it. This government needs to listen and reverse course. It feels like a target on rural communities and has distracted from the original purpose of the bill. It is time for the Prime Minister to see his mistake and fix it. Will he?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I think all members will agree that Canadians expect that our communities and their homes are always safe. They want to ensure that deadly military-style assault guns are not available on our streets. Speaker, and that is the commitment that we made to Canadians. What we are not targeting is lawful hunters. This is a complex piece of legislation. We need to make sure that we take the time to review it carefully so that we can take deadly military-style assault guns off our street. Thank you.
Member for Courtenay Albany.
Madam Speaker, the Liberals promised they would keep people safe from handgun violence, but at the very last second, the Liberals added an amendment to Bill C-21 that isn't about keeping our city centres or children safe, but instead would hurt rural and coastal communities. This bill was supposed to protect people, not go after hunters, farmers, or Indigenous peoples. Will the Prime Minister listen to the outpour of concerns and clean up his mess?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question. As a First Nations person, I know that hunting is a constitutional right that's integral to many nations. C-21's intent is to ban handguns and assault weapons like AR-15s, full stop. There has been some confusion, there has been some concerns raised, but the committee will get it right. And we will always respect Indigenous hunters and their right to pass on that knowledge to their children like I plan to pass on to my son.
Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Madam Speaker, foreign investment is key for our economy and supports the creation of employment opportunities across the country. And we know that national security goes hand in hand with this type of investment. Can the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry update this House on what our government is doing to strengthen our investment requirements?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Hamilton East for Hamilton East Stony Creek for a very important question, Madam Speaker. We know that the economic security, Madam Speaker, is national security.
Will members allow the Minister to answer the question? The Honourable Minister.
Enthusiasm on the other side for what we tabled just this week. As I was saying, I'd like to thank my colleague from Hamilton East, Stony Creek, for a very important question. We know that economic security is indeed national security, something that our colleagues have raised this morning. Earlier this week, I was proud to table a bill which will amend the Invest Canada Act so that our government can act more decisively when it comes to foreign investments and national security, Madam Speaker. We'll continue to ensure.
The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Madam Speaker, opposition to these Liberals' proposed ban on hunting rifles and shotguns is growing. Yesterday, the Assembly of First Nations issued a declaration opposing Bill C-21 because it attacks treaty hunting rights. This Liberal government claims that there is no relationship more important than that with Indigenous peoples, but they failed to consult with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. When will they admit that they failed to respect the rights of Indigenous peoples and scrap Bill C-21?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, for more than 20 years, I've been going to the Assembly of First Nations. I've been a part of the resolutions. I've been part of drafting those resolutions. I've been part of voting on those resolutions. I applaud the proactive advocacy of First Nations when they hear something that they don't quite understand. But I want to make it clear that First Nations hunting rights will always be respected by this government. We know it's a constitutional right. We know there is a constitutional element of this, and we will get it right, and Indigenous hunters will continue into the future.
Bravo. The honourable member for Essex.
Speaker, I spoke with Joe this morning, a local hunter and manufacturer of parts for legal hunting rifles. He recently purchased a CNC machine and hired skilled trade workers. Now, this Liberal government is threatening to shut his doors on his business and take away his firearms. One must assume that hundreds of thousands of dollar CNC machines are part of the buyback program that doesn't exist. While law-abiding Canadians are on the right side of history, this Liberal government is the outlier. When will they stop targeting hunters and farmers like Joe?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I'm sure that Joe would agree that there is no place in our society for deadly military-style assault guns, the kind that were used for shooting at Polytechnique or the Quebec mass shooting, or most recently where 2 police officers were killed in South Simcoe. Speaker, we are not targeting lawful rifles that are used by hunters. This is a complex piece of legislation. That's why it requires careful review and scrutiny, and I'm very thankful to Bloc and NDP members to have given the permission to have emergency meetings so that we can get this legislation right.
The honourable member for Brandon Souris.
Speaker, farmers and hunters are not responsible for the increase in violent crime, nor are they the source of illegal firearms pouring in from the United States. Time and time again, the Prime Minister blames law-abiding firearms owners for his government's failure to make our communities safer. Will the Prime Minister do the right thing, stop targeting our farmers and hunters, and go after the criminals and gangs that are to blame for the increase in violent crime?
Hear, hear. The honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I want to assure the member opposite that we respect all our hunters and Indigenous peoples who rely on hunting. We respect the sustenance rights of Indigenous peoples, and we are not targeting those rights whatsoever. What we are going after, what we are banning, what we are trying to take off our streets are deadly military-style assault guns, the kind that are made to be used in a battlefield. They have no place on our streets. We are going to make sure that we review this legislation carefully, get it right, so that our neighborhoods are...
Honourable member for Langley Aldergrove.
Madam Speaker, Marissa from Langley shared with me recently her deep concern about the Liberal Party's direct attacks on hunters like herself and farmers and sport shooters. She also shared with me her concern about gun violence and urges me to support common sense gun controls. But in her own words, I can detect no sign of that in Bill C-21. So on behalf of Marissa and the hundreds of others who have written to me recently on this topic, when will this Liberal government stop targeting law-abiding hunters and farmers?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, let's be absolutely clear. We are targeting deadly military-style assault guns that are made for battlefields. They have no place on our streets in any community, whether that is a rural community or urban community. We are not targeting. In fact, we respect hunters and Indigenous peoples who rely on hunting. That is not the intention of this legislation. It is a complex piece of legislation. Members know this. It's quite lengthy. That's why we're going to take time to review it and get it right so that we can ban military-style assault guns.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi Bay James, Nunavik-EU. Madam Speaker, Quebec's early childhood centres are a unique childcare model, unique in the world. Quebecers are proud, rightly so, of their childcare centres. Not only do our childcare centres socialize Quebecois children in an outstanding way, but also, since their creation, they have enabled millions of Quebecers to have greater access to work. The childcare centres are universal, inclusive, and beneficial to Quebec. Quebec, which is crazy about its children. Can the Minister commit in C-35 to respecting the expertise of this Quebec childcare system? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, I thank my Bloc Québécois colleague for her question.
Quebec has led the way for 25 years in what good, affordable, high-quality childcare means to Canadian families. And I'm pleased that every province and territory in this country has now signed on in understanding how affordable childcare is needed and demanded by families across this country to give our children the best start in life. Bill C-35 respects the jurisdictions of every province and territory in how they run their affordable childcare systems. We continue to learn from Quebec, and we're so happy that provinces and territories have signed on board.
L'honorable député d'Abitibi.
Honourable member for Abitibi Bay James Nunavik EU. Madam Speaker, committing to respecting Quebec's jurisdiction over child care means no conditions, no strings attached. It means enshrining in law the right to opt out with full compensation. We understand that the Liberals want to protect their Canada-wide childcare program for the future. But to impose conditions on Quebec's system, conditions that Ottawa wants to implement across Canada, well, that's out of the question. Can the minister guarantee that C-35 will not impose any conditions on Quebec and that we will have the right to opt out with full compensation?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for her question, and I'll emphasize again the legislation that we're putting forward is to ensure what's in place stays in place, including the wonderful model that Quebec has put in place for their citizens for the last 25 years. Madam Speaker, we want to respect the jurisdiction of all provinces and territories in running their early learning and childcare systems, and we want to make sure that every child in every part of this country, no matter where they live, has the best start in life. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Fort Murray, Cold Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Winter is already a hard time for so many Canadian families, and this year is going to be especially tough with rising interest rates and inflation. Heating costs are expected to double this winter, which will leave more families making a hard choice between heating and eating. The carbon tax isn't working. It is a tax plan that is driving up the cost of everything from gas to groceries. So my question is simple. Will the Liberals stop forcing their failed carbon tax on Canadian families?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, again, Madam Speaker, we're focused like a laser beam on affordability, and we had rental supports, dental supports, and other affordability measures that the Conservatives just voted against, and that's unfortunate, Madam Speaker. The honourable members from the prairies like me, and there's good news coming to the prairies, Madam Speaker. In your province of Alberta and Saskatchewan, $1,500 in the climate action rebate. Those payments are going to be coming quarterly, Madam Speaker. That's going to help with affordability. That is going to help with cash flow. And, Madam Speaker, that's going to help reduce pollution and drive innovation.
Member for Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. But unfortunately, that's absolutely cold comfort for families that are struggling right now to keep the heat on in their homes. More Alberta families are going to be paying in carbon tax than what they'll receive back. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has made that exceptionally clear. And 1.5 million Canadians visited a food bank in one single month. Just a couple days ago, a poll came out saying that 53% of Canadians are fearful about feeding their family. This isn't a laughing matter, and it's not something to just spend away. Inflation is eating up those costs. When will they axe their failed carbon?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, listening to the Conservatives on the other side, you know, the words climate change just never parse their lips. And that's not surprising, Madam Speaker, because for 10 long years they did absolutely nothing on climate change. Madam Speaker, we are building the new economy, and while Conservatives want to make pollution free again, we're looking to the future. They're stuck in the past. Mr. Speaker, we're doing something about climate change and affordability.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer Mountain View.
Madam Speaker, war, food scarcity, and energy insecurity is devastating our European partners who are now cutting back production, turning down the heat, and going back to high-polluting energy sources. Yet this Liberal government, whose environmental record is abysmal, shows no recognition of this global disaster that awaits, nor its effect on our own citizens, as we've seen with skyrocketing home heating costs. When will this Liberal government do the prudent thing and stop forcing their failed carbon tax on Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy to have the opportunity to talk about how we are standing alongside our European allies. We are standing alongside Ukraine and all of our European allies in this really difficult time. And I'm happy that the member opposite has acknowledged this is a global challenge that we're facing. We, in fact, when the German Chancellor came to Canada, we worked with the German Chancellor to have a deal on hydrogen, on critical minerals. These are the pieces that they came looking for as support from us. We are there to continue with the energy of the future and an economy for the future for our country. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Châteauguay-Lacolle.
The honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Madam Speaker, tomorrow is Human Rights Day. This day marks the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As human rights are being trampled in places like Russia, Iran, and Myanmar, Canada must stand up for the values that we hold dear. The Minister for Foreign Affairs, can the Minister of Foreign Affairs inform the House of the steps we're taking to protect human rights and hold those who violate them to account? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague from Châteauguay-Lacolle for her excellent question. As you know, human rights is at the core of our foreign policy. That's why today we impose sanctions against 67 individuals and 9 entities that are complicit in human rights violations in Russia, Iran, and Myanmar. Canada will continue to fight for justice. Canada will continue to hold accountable those who violate human rights. Our government will always stand up for Canadian values at home and around the world. Thank you.
Member for Yorkton Melville.
Minus 40, Madam Speaker. Welcome to the first week of December in the prairies. You know what? Cold winters don't shut us down. And driving long distances is something that we have to do even when it's freezing cold outside. But something we should not have to do is wear our winter coats inside our homes. When will this Liberal government stop forcing their failed carbon tax plan on Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Madam Chair, the honourable member mentioned the prairies where I am from. I wonder if she knows that in Manitoba we had 2 1-in-300-year floods that cost $1 billion each. Madam Speaker, there was the Calgary flood, $5 billion, Madam Speaker. 7,000 people were forced from their homes in my home province. Madam Speaker, the costs are rising. The Conservatives are in denial. When are they going to get serious about climate change?
Good job. Honorable député de Montmagny-Lillet-Kamouraska.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lillet, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Thank you, Madam Speaker. In rural areas like mine, and in many other rural areas in Canada, many people heat with oil. With winter weather upon us, what does that do? Well, bills go up. What's worse is that these bills will continue to rise because of the Liberals and their plan to triple the carbon tax. People don't need long-term measures. Right now, they need real solutions to help them get through this winter. People are at the end of their rope, and this government seems totally indifferent. What is the government waiting for to immediately cancel the carbon tax hike? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, I'm happy to have a chance to talk about everything that we're doing for the environment and to support Canadians. In Quebec, the federal system doesn't apply. Quebec has its own system, but on our end, we're doing a lot to support Canadians. We have our dental care benefits plan. That's very new. We are helping Canadians pay rent. We're helping Canadians get through these very difficult times. We know that these are tough times. We are here for Canadians, and we're also here to help the environment.
Yes.
Madam Speaker, since 2017, Canadian diplomats and their families that were posted to Havana, Cuba, have complained of suffering from unexplained illness, despite the Prime Minister saying that he takes this, quote, very, very seriously, end quote. This has dragged on for years without a resolution. Last month, the government appointed Justice Cromwell to mediate for the families, but not the diplomats. Is the government going to resolve this matter, or is it going to throw these public servants under the bus and blame them, like the government did yesterday with the RCP contract with Sinclair Technologies?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I am concerned, as my colleague is, about this very issue, and I look forward working with him on it. Obviously, the health and safety of our diplomats and their families is at the core of our priorities, and we are working with the RCMP, working with Health Canada, working also within Global Affairs Canada through an expert team to address this issue. But as mentioned, it would be a pleasure to work with my critic on this. Thank you so much.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Centre.
Madam Speaker, yesterday the Minister of Family, Children and Social Development introduced Bill C-35 in this House to enshrine this Canada-wide early learning and childcare system into law. On this side of the House, we know just how important access to affordable, quality and inclusive childcare is for the economy and women empowerment. Last Friday, the Prime Minister announced in Richmond that British Columbia reached its target to reduce childcare fees by 50%. Could the Parliamentary Secretary for Family, Children and Social
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member from Richmond Centre for his question. Bill C-35, Madam Speaker, will enshrine the Canada-wide early learning and childcare system into law, ensuring that a future government couldn't unilaterally cancel the agreements. Bill C-35 is necessary because we know that Canadian parents are counting on us to have affordable childcare available to them, and they're planning their family budgets with this in mind and their futures. Our government is committed to delivering affordability measures to help Canadians, and affordable childcare is a hallmark of that commitment. Madam Speaker, I invite all members.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
Nunavut need to hunt to feed their families and to protect themselves from dangerous predators such as polar bears. Bill C-21 was about getting handguns off the streets. But now, with this last-minute amendment, the Liberal government has shown how out of touch they are with the daily life of Nunavut. My community is worried and confused. When will this government stop playing political games and ensure Indigenous communities can protect themselves from dangerous predators like...
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the member opposite for her question. We've heard from many Northern MPs who live in different realities than many of us do in urban centres. We know that there's been concerns. There's been some misinformation on C-21. We know the committee has added 2 extra meetings to make sure that we're getting it right, because we always want to make sure that we're respecting Indigenous hunting rights. Our government will continue to do that. We know it's a constitutional right, but it's also the right thing to do.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I speak to you from Montreal, where the world is gathering for COP15 in a desperate last chance effort to save endangered nature. But you don't have to look far. You don't even have to look as far as Fairy Creek on Vancouver Island or the threatened caribou habitat in the Boreal. Here on the island of Montreal, the federal government is ignoring the opportunity to protect 215 hectares of highly threatened, important wetland biodiversity, home to least bittern, short-eared owl, and monarch butterflies. This is federal jurisdiction. When will the government act to protect it?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member for the questions, and I think she would agree with me that thousands of species are at risk here at home. 1 in 5, according to the Wild Species Report, are in danger of extinction. That's millions around the world, Madam Speaker. That's why we're gathered in Montreal to face the biodiversity crisis head-on at the UN Biodiversity Convention. And, Madam Speaker, we're stepping up to preserve, conserve 30% of our land and waters by 2030, and we hope to inspire the world to do the same. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
This is all the time we have for question period. Yes, the Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes. On a point of order.
Speaker. Just a point of order arising from question period. The member for North Island, Powell River, said during QP that it was the Liberals that were solely responsible for the mess of C-21, when in fact the NDP voted with the Liberals on time allocation. I'd like to...
That is most definitely a question of debate, and yes. L'honorable député de Louis-Saint-Laurent.
The member for Louis-Saint-Laurent. Madam Speaker, the member for Saanich Gulf
Islands, in her question, said that she was in Montreal for the COP15 conference. I was there yesterday. I have no problem with that. But the question I'm asking you, it's a point of clarification. There's no scandal here. Can a member mention where they are when they are not physically in the chamber? As far as I know, you can't do that. But I'd like to get clarification from you. That said, I believe it's a relevant issue. Absolutely. I've just noted that with some other colleagues. I'll take that under consideration because this has already happened. Again, I'll take it under advisement and check in the standing orders.